The wind howled through the valley like a wounded animal as Julia Hayes pulled her shawl tighter around her shoulders, her gaze fixed on the flickering lantern light seeping through the cracks of the weathered barn. She hadn't intended to intrude on anyone's private moments when she'd arrived at the isolated ranch seeking work, but the muffled sound of a man's sobs carried on the night air had drawn her forward with an irresistible pull. Colorado Territory, 1875. Julia had been traveling for weeks, her meager possessions and considerable determination the only things keeping her moving forward after losing everything back east. At 26, she was considered by many to be well on her way to spinsterhood, but circumstances rather than choice had shaped her path thus far. The advertisement for a housekeeper at her remote cattle ranch had seemed like Providence when she'd spotted it in a Denver newspaper. She hesitated at the barn door, wondering if she should announce herself or retreat to the small cabin where she'd been told to wait until morning. The gentleman who'd greeted her upon arrival introducing himself as Mr. Charles. The ranch foreman had explained that the owner, Mr. Yates, was occupied with his children and would meet her in the morning to discuss her potential employment. She hadn't expected to encounter anyone at this late hour. Drawing a deep breath, Julia pushed the heavy wooden door just enough to peer inside. The dim lantern light revealed a man seated on a bale of hay, his broad shoulders shaking with silent grief. His hat lay abandoned on the straw-covered floor, revealing thick, dark hair streaked with premature silver at the temples. His face was buried in his hands, but she could see he wore the practical clothing of a working rancher rather than a hired hand. "Excuse me," she said softly, immediately regretting her intrusion when the man's head snapped up, revealing a face lined with grief and eyes rimmed red. "I'm so sorry to disturb you. I can leave. Who are you?" His voice was rough with emotion, but there was no anger in it, only exhaustion and a hint of embarrassment at being discovered in such a vulnerable state. "Julia Hayes, sir. I arrived this evening for the housekeeper position. Mr. Charles showed me to the cabin and said I'd meet you in the morning." She remained half hidden behind the door, ready to retreat. I was concerned someone might be hurt." The man scrubbed a hand across his face, composing himself with visible effort. "Yancy Everett," he said, rising to his feet. He was tall, at least 6 feet, with the lean, muscular build of a man who worked his own land. "I apologize for the state you found me in, Miss Hayes. Not exactly the introduction I'd planned." "Please, there's no need to apologize," Julia said, stepping fully into the barn now. "I'm the one intruding." Yancy retrieved his hat from the ground but didn't put it on, instead turning it absently in his hands. She noticed calluses on his fingers, the hands of someone who knew hard work. His face, now that she could see it clearly, was handsome despite the grief etched into every line, strong jawline partially hidden beneath several days' growth of beard, straight nose, and eyes the color of the sky after a storm. "My boys are asleep in the house," he said, as though offering an explanation for why he'd sought solitude in the barn. I try not to let them see me like this." "How many children do you have, Mr. Everett?" Julia asked gently. "2. Samuel's 8 and James is just turned 6. His voice softened at the mention of his sons. "Good boys. They deserve better than—" He stopped himself, shaking his head. "It's late, Miss Hayes, and you've had a long journey. We can discuss your duties in the morning." Julia nodded but didn't move toward the door. Something in his defeated posture kept her rooted to the spot. "Mr. Everett, I don't mean to overstep, but if there's anything I can do to help," he gave a humorless laugh. "Unless you can turn back time or raise the dead, I'm afraid there's not much anyone can do." The bluntness of his words struck her, but she didn't flinch. She was no stranger to grief herself. "It's my wife's birthday," he continued unexpectedly, his gaze fixed on some distant point. "Would have been her 30th today. She died 2 years ago. Childbirth, we lost the baby too." He spoke flatly, as though reciting facts about a stranger rather than sharing his deepest wound. "I'm so sorry," Julia said, meaning it. "I lost my husband in the war and my parents to influenza last winter." She hadn't planned to share her own sorrows, but something about the man's raw grief called to her. Yancy's eyes met hers, a flash of recognition passing between them, the silent understanding that exists only between people who have known true loss. "The boys," he said after a moment. "They need a woman's care, I've tried, but—" He gestured vaguely. "The house is a disaster. Their clothes are patched poorly. Samuel's getting to an age where he notices these things, and I can't." His voice broke. "I can't be everything they need." Julia took a step closer. "Well, that's why I'm here, isn't it? To help with the house and the children." "Yes," he agreed, straightening his shoulders with visible effort. "Yes, that's why you're here." He cleared his throat. "I should let you get some rest. Charles showed you to the cabin." He did. "It's very comfortable, thank you." Yancy nodded. "We'll speak more in the morning then." He placed his hat back on his head, tugging the brim low as if to shield his face. "Good night, Miss Hayes. Good night, Mr. Everett." As Julia walked back to her cabin through the cool night air, she found herself thinking about the man she'd just met, his grief, his obvious love for his sons, the weight he carried alone. She'd come to this remote ranch seeking nothing more than honest work and a roof over her head. But something told her life at the Everett Ranch would be far more complicated than she'd anticipated. The morning dawned bright and clear, the kind of piercing blue sky that seemed unique to the Colorado mountains. Julia had risen before sunrise, determined to make a good impression on her first day. She dressed in her most serviceable dress, a navy blue cotton with minimal trimming, and pinned her chestnut hair in a simple but neat bun at the nape of her neck. The main house was larger than she'd expected, a substantial two-story structure built of solid timber with a wide porch wrapping around three sides. It spoke of ambition and prosperity, though as she drew closer, she noticed signs of neglect: peeling paint on the window frames, a loose board on the steps, untended flower beds that had once clearly been lovingly maintained. She knocked on the front door, waiting patiently. After a moment, it swung open to reveal a small boy with tousled dark hair and eyes exactly like his father's. "Hello," she said warmly. "You must be Samuel or James. I'm Miss Hayes." The boy regarded her seriously. "I'm Samuel Everett. Are you the new housekeeper?" "I am." "Is your father available?" Samuel nodded and stepped back to allow her entry. "Pa's in the kitchen trying to make breakfast," he said, with the long, suffering tone of someone who'd endured many failed attempts. "He burns the bacon every time." Julia suppressed a smile. "Well, perhaps I can help with that." The interior of the house confirmed what Yancy had said the night before: it was indeed a disaster. Not filthy, but chaotically disorganized, with items clearly not in their proper places. Coats draped over furniture instead of hooks, boots scattered by the door, books and toys piled haphazardly on every surface. She followed Samuel through to the kitchen, where she found Yancy Everett standing at the stove, looking considerably more composed than he had the previous night. He wore a clean shirt with the sleeves rolled up, revealing muscular forearms. A smaller boy, James, she presumed, sat at the table watching his father with obvious adoration despite the smoke rising from the pan. "Pa, Miss Hayes is here," Samuel announced. Yancy turned, a flicker of embarrassment crossing his features as he took in Julia standing in his chaotic kitchen. "Miss Hayes, good morning." He glanced at the smoking pan. "I'm afraid breakfast isn't going well." "May I?" Julia asked, already moving toward the stove. Relief washed over his face. "Please." She took the pan from the heat and assessed the situation. The bacon was indeed burned on one side, but she managed to salvage most of it. Finding a bowl of eggs already cracked and whisked, she quickly set about preparing a proper breakfast, aware of 3 pairs of eyes watching her every move. "Samuel, could you please show me where the plates are kept?" she asked, keeping her tone light and friendly. The boy jumped up eagerly. "Yes, madam, they're up here, but I can't reach them without standing on a chair." "I'll get them," Yancy said, stepping forward and easily retrieving 4 plates from a high cupboard. His arm brushed against hers as he set them down, and Julia felt an unexpected flutter in her stomach at the brief contact. "Thank you," she murmured, turning her attention back to the eggs. Within minutes, she had breakfast on the table: salvaged bacon, fluffy scrambled eggs, and slices of bread she'd toasted in a second pan. The transformation wasn't lost on anyone in the room. "It doesn't look burned at all," James exclaimed in wonder, his first words since she'd entered the kitchen. Yancy shot her a grateful look as they all sat down to eat. "Miss Hayes, you've already proven your worth and the sun's barely up. This is just a simple breakfast," she demurred. "Once I get properly situated, I can prepare much better meals." "This is the best breakfast we've had in forever," Samuel declared, his mouth half full of eggs. "Samuel, mind your manners," his father admonished gently. "Sorry, Pa." They ate in companionable silence for a few moments before Yancy spoke again. "I should explain your duties, Miss Hayes. As you can see, the house needs considerable attention. Beyond that, the boys need looking after when I'm working the ranch. Meals, laundry, general household management." He paused. "I should warn you that we're rather isolated here. Town is a half-day's ride, and we only go in for supplies once or twice a month, if you find the solitude too difficult." "I don't mind solitude, Mr. Everett," Julia assured him, "and I'm accustomed to hard work." "Your references spoke highly of your capabilities," he acknowledged. "Though none mentioned you were so young." The statement wasn't accusatory, merely observational. "I'm 26, Julia replied. "I've been managing households since I was 16, first my parents and then my own after I married." Yancy nodded. "Your letter mentioned you were widowed." "Yes. My husband died at Petersburg. It's been 10 years now." The boys were listening with undisguised curiosity, but neither spoke. "You'll have Sundays to yourself," Yancy continued, "and one half-day during the week of your choosing. Your cabin is yours to use as you wish. Salary, as we discussed in our correspondence, paid monthly. Does this arrangement still suit you?" "It does," Julia confirmed. "I'm eager to begin putting things in order." "We're glad to have you, Miss Hayes." He turned to his sons. "Boys, what do you say?" "Thank you for breakfast, Miss Hayes," they chorused. Julia smiled at them. "You're very welcome. Now, if you've finished eating, perhaps you could show me around the house so I can get my bearings." The tour, led enthusiastically by Samuel with occasional input from a shy James, revealed the full extent of the household's disarray. Clothes needed mending, cupboards needed organizing, floors needed scrubbing, and every surface needed dusting. But beneath the disorder, Julia could see that it had once been a beautiful, well-maintained home. "This was Mama's sewing room," Samuel explained as they entered a small, sunny room off the main parlor. Unlike the rest of the house, this room remained largely untouched, with a sewing machine still positioned by the window and bolts of fabric neatly arranged on shelves. A half-finished child's shirt lay beside the machine, as though its maker had just stepped away for a moment and would soon return. "Your father mentioned your mother's birthday was yesterday," Julia said gently. Samuel nodded. "That's why Pa was sad. He's always sad on Mama's birthday and on the day she went to heaven." "That's because he loved her very much," Julia said. "He tries not to cry where we can see," James added solemnly, "but sometimes we hear him at night." Julia's heart ached for these motherless boys and their grieving father. "It's all right for people to cry when they're sad," she told them, "even grown men like your father." "Miss Hayes," Yancy's voice came from the doorway, startling all three of them. How long he had been standing there, Julia couldn't tell, but the tightness around his eyes suggested he'd heard at least part of the conversation. "I need to head out to check the north pasture," he said, his voice carefully controlled. "The boys know their lessons for the morning. They can show you where everything is kept." "Of course, Mr. Everett," Julia replied, wondering if she'd overstepped. "We'll be fine here." He nodded stiffly and disappeared down the hall. A moment later, she heard the front door close. Samuel looked up at her with worried eyes. "Did we make Pa angry?" "No," Julia assured him, though she wasn't entirely certain herself. "He's just busy with ranch work. Now, why don't you show me where you do your lessons, and then I can start getting this house in order while you study." The boys proved to be bright and generally well-behaved, settling down with their books while Julia began the monumental task of bringing order to the household. She started in the kitchen, scrubbing surfaces and organizing foodstuffs, then moved on to the main living areas. By midday, she had made noticeable progress in the downstairs rooms. She prepared a simple lunch for the boys, who chatted eagerly about their lessons and ranch life. Julia found herself charmed by Samuel's earnest explanations and James's quiet observations. They were good children, she thought, despite the difficulties they'd faced. Yancy didn't return for the midday meal, but Charles the foreman stopped by to check if she needed anything from the storage shed. "Mr. Everett asked me to tell you he'll be back for supper," the older man informed her. "He sometimes loses track of time when he's out with the cattle." Julia nodded her understanding. "Thank you, Mr. Charles. We'll have supper ready at 6 if that's suitable." The afternoon passed quickly as she continued her cleaning efforts, pausing occasionally to help the boys with their lessons or to listen to their stories about life on the ranch. By late afternoon, she had turned her attention to planning supper, determined to show Yancy Everett that his faith in her capabilities was not misplaced. She found a haunch of venison in the cold storage and set about preparing a proper roast with potatoes and carrots from the root cellar. The kitchen garden, though somewhat overgrown, yielded fresh greens for a salad. She even managed to bake a simple apple cobbler using preserved fruit she discovered in the pantry. The boys watched her work with fascination. "Pa never makes food like this," Samuel observed, breathing in the aroma of the roasting venison. "Your father has many other responsibilities," Julia reminded him. "That's why I'm here to help." "Mama used to make cobbler," James said softly. "I remember," Julia smiled at him. "Would you like to help me set the table? You can show me where everything is kept." The boys eagerly assisted, and by the time they heard the sound of boots on the porch, the dining room table was properly set, the food was ready to be served, and the kitchen was clean and orderly. Yancy entered, removing his hat as he stepped through the door. He paused, taking in the transformed space with evident surprise. "This doesn't look like the same house," he remarked, his gaze sweeping over the neatly arranged room before settling on Julia. "We've made a good start," she replied, feeling an unexpected flush of pleasure at his approval. "Supper's ready whenever you are, Mr. Everett." "Pa, Miss Hayes made cobbler," James announced excitedly. "And the house doesn't smell like dust anymore." A ghost of a smile touched Yancy's lips. "Let me just wash up," he said. "I won't keep you waiting." When he returned a few minutes later, face and hands clean and hair damp at the temples where he'd smoothed it back with water, Julia couldn't help noticing again what a handsome man he was beneath the grief that seemed to shadow him. He was younger than she'd initially thought, probably no more than 32 or 33. Supper was a success. Yancy complimented the food sincerely, and the boys ate with enthusiasm, especially the cobbler. The conversation flowed more easily than Julia had expected, with Yancy asking the boys about their lessons and them eagerly sharing what they'd learned. "Miss Hayes helped me with my sums," Samuel told his father proudly. "She knows a different way to do them that's easier to remember." "Is that so?" Yancy glanced at Julia with interest. "Were you a teacher before Miss Hayes?" "No, but I helped teach the younger children in our community back home," she explained. "I've always enjoyed it." "Miss Hayes can read really fast," James added. "She read 3 pages of my book in the time it takes me to read one." Yancy smiled at his younger son's excitement. "It sounds like you've had a good first day with Miss Hayes." "The best day," Samuel agreed earnestly, "and the house looks so much better already." After supper, Julia supervised the boys as they prepared for bed, helping them wash up and ensuring they had clean nightshirts. They'd shown her where everything was kept, though finding properly mended clothing had been a challenge. She made mental notes of all the mending she'd need to attend to in the coming days. Once the boys were in bed, she returned to the kitchen to find Yancy still seated at the table, a cup of coffee in front of him. He rose when she entered. "The boys are settled," she told him. "They asked if I would read to them tomorrow night." "They've taken to you quickly," Yancy observed. "I'm grateful for that, and for everything you've accomplished today." He gestured to the now orderly kitchen. "This place hasn't looked this good since." He didn't finish the sentence, but he didn't need to. "It's just a beginning," Julia said. "There's still much to be done." "Even so," he hesitated. Miss Hayes, about this morning, I apologize if I seemed abrupt. When I heard you speaking to the boys about their mother, no, I should apologize, Julia interrupted. It wasn't my place to discuss such personal matters with your children. Yancy shook his head. That's just it. It is your place now, in a way. You're here to care for them, and that means helping them navigate their feelings, including their grief. He looked down at his coffee. I haven't done well with that part. I've tried to shield them from my own pain, but children see more than we give them credit for. They're wonderful boys, Mr. Everett, Julia said softly. You've done well by them under difficult circumstances. He looked up at her, gratitude in his eyes. Thank you for saying that. It means a great deal. After a pause, he added, would you care for some coffee or tea if you prefer? I realize we haven't had much chance to speak privately today. Coffee would be nice, thank you. He poured her a cup, and they sat across from each other at the table. In the warm glow of the oil lamps, the kitchen felt almost cozy. May I ask how you came to be seeking a position so far from civilization, Miss Hayes? Yancy inquired. Your letter mentioned you were from Pennsylvania originally. Julia wrapped her hands around the warm cup. After my parents died last winter, there was nothing keeping me in Lancaster. The house went to pay their debts, and I found myself at something of a crossroads. She took a sip of coffee. I could have sought a position as a companion to an elderly lady or perhaps found work in a shop, but I've never been afraid of hard work or solitude. When I saw your advertisement, it seemed like an opportunity for a fresh start. Colorado territory is a long way to travel for a fresh start. Sometimes distance is what's needed, she replied simply. Yancy studied her for a moment. I think we understand each other on that point at least. Your ranch is beautiful, Julia said, changing the subject slightly. How long have you been here? Almost 10 years now. Elizabeth and I came out from Missouri just after we married. She was 19, I was 23, full of dreams and determination. A shadow crossed his face at the memory. We built this place together, though folks said we were fools to try. The first few years were hard, but by the time Samuel was born, we'd turned a profit. Added more land 2 years later, built the bigger house when James was on the way. He stared into his coffee. Elizabeth always said she wanted a big family. She got her wish for the house, at least. The pain in his voice was raw, and Julia's heart ached for him. She must have been a remarkable woman. She was. He looked up at her. You would have liked her, I think. She was practical but kind. Never complained, even when things were at their hardest, and she loved those boys more than anything. He cleared his throat. I should let you get some rest. You've had a long day. Yes, I suppose I should, Julia agreed, rising from her chair. What time would you like breakfast in the morning? The boys and I are usually up at dawn, but please don't feel you need to start so early on your first full day. Dawn is fine, Julia assured him. I'm an early riser by habit. Yancy walked her to the door. Thank you again, Miss Hayes. Today has been. Well, it's been the best day this house has seen in a long while. Good night, Mr. Everett. Good night. As Julia walked back to her cabin in the cool evening air, she reflected on her first day at the Everett Ranch. The work would be challenging, no doubt, but there was something deeply satisfying about bringing order to chaos, about seeing the immediate results of her efforts in the grateful faces of Yancy and his sons. And there was something about Yancy Everett himself, his quiet strength, his evident love for his children, his struggle to carry on after devastating loss that resonated with her in unexpected ways. She had come to Colorado seeking nothing more than honest work and perhaps some peace. She certainly hadn't been looking for connections or attachments. Yet something about this grieving widower and his motherless sons had already worked its way into her heart after just one day. As she prepared for bed in her small cabin, Julia wondered what the coming days and weeks might bring. The days quickly settled into a rhythm at the Everett Ranch. Julia rose before dawn each morning to prepare breakfast for Yancy and the boys, then spent her days bringing order to the house, tending to the never-ending laundry, preparing meals, and looking after Samuel and James while their father worked the ranch. The boys continued with their lessons in the mornings, and Julia found herself increasingly involved in their education. Samuel struggled with reading but showed a natural aptitude for mathematics, while James was the opposite, a voracious reader who balked at his arithmetic exercises. She adapted her approach to each boy's strengths, finding ways to make their challenging subjects more engaging. After a week, the transformation of the house was remarkable. Floors gleamed, windows sparkled, furniture was dusted and polished, and cupboards were neatly organized. Julia had mended piles of clothing, darning socks and patching knees with skillful stitches. She'd even begun tackling the overgrown kitchen garden, coaxing it back to productivity with careful attention. Yancy noticed everything. Though he spent long days working the cattle, training horses, and managing the business side of the ranch with Charles, he always took time in the evenings to acknowledge Julia's efforts. His gratitude was evident not just in his words, but in the way his shoulders seemed less burdened, his eyes clearer, as order returned to his home. "You've worked miracles, Miss Hayes," he told her one evening after the boys had gone to bed. They'd fallen into a habit of sharing coffee in the kitchen after supper, a quiet time to discuss the children's progress and the needs of the household. "Hardly miracles," Julia demurred, "just good old-fashioned hard work. Even so," he hesitated, "the boys are different too. Happier. Samuel hasn't had a nightmare all week, and James is talking more than he has in months." "They're wonderful children," Julia said warmly. "It's a joy to spend my days with them." Yancy studied her over the rim of his coffee cup. "May I ask you something, Miss Hayes?" "Of course." "Why did you never remarry? You're young, educated, capable." He cleared his throat. "Forgive me if the question is too personal." Julia considered her answer carefully. "After John died, I returned to my parents' home. They needed me. My father's health was failing, and my mother couldn't manage alone. By the time they both passed last winter, I was 25 and considered rather past my prime for marriage prospects." She smiled wryly. "And to be honest, I never met anyone who made me want to consider matrimony again." "I understand that," Yancy said quietly. "The thought of replacing Elizabeth," he shook his head, "it seems impossible." "No one could replace her," Julia agreed softly. "But that doesn't mean your heart won't heal enough to find happiness again someday." He met her eyes, something unreadable in his gaze. "Perhaps," he said finally, then changed the subject. "I need to ride into town on Saturday for supplies. Would you like to come along? It would give you a chance to see more of the area, and I'm sure the boys would enjoy your company on the journey." Julia brightened at the prospect. "I'd like that very much, thank you." Saturday dawned clear and mild, perfect weather for the journey to town. Julia had risen earlier than usual to prepare a hearty breakfast and pack food for their midday meal on the trail. The boys were excited about the outing, chattering eagerly as they helped load the wagon. Julia wore her best day dress for the trip, a cornflower blue cotton with white trim that brought out the blue in her eyes. She'd pinned her hair in a neat coil beneath her bonnet and donned a light shawl against the morning chill. Yancy, dressed in clean denims and a fresh shirt, his dark hair neatly combed beneath his hat, helped her up to the wagon seat with a gentle hand at her elbow. The brief contact sent an unexpected warmth through her, which she did her best to ignore. "You look very nice, Miss Hayes," he said, his voice low enough that the boys, already settled in the back of the wagon, couldn't hear. "Thank you, Mr. Everett," she replied, feeling color rise to her cheeks despite herself. The journey to town took several hours, but the time passed pleasantly. The boys pointed out landmarks along the way, eager to share their knowledge with Julia. Samuel explained which creeks had the best fishing spots, while James identified various birds and wildflowers they passed. Yancy mostly listened, occasionally adding details or gently correcting the boys' more fanciful claims. Julia noticed how he seemed to relax as they traveled, the tension he often carried in his shoulders easing somewhat. "This is beautiful country," she observed as they crested a ridge that offered a spectacular view of the valley below, with the distant mountains rising majestically beyond. "It is," Yancy agreed. "Elizabeth fell in love with this view the first time we saw it. Said she'd never seen anything so grand back in Missouri." His voice held nostalgia rather than raw pain when he mentioned his late wife, and Julia took that as a positive sign. Pa, can we show Miss Hayes the waterfall on the way back? Samuel called from the wagon bed. If we have time, Yancy replied. We've got a fair bit of business in town first. The town of Pine Creek proved to be larger than Julia had expected, though still modest by Eastern standards. A single wide street lined with wooden buildings formed the main thoroughfare, with smaller lanes branching off. There was a general store, a hotel with a restaurant, a church, a schoolhouse, a smithy, and various other businesses catering to the needs of the surrounding ranches and farms. It's grown considerably in the last few years, Yancy explained as he guided the wagon down the main street. The railroad coming through 15 miles south has brought more people to the area. They stopped first at the general store, where Yancy had a substantial list of supplies to purchase. Julia helped select fabrics for new shirts for the boys, as well as household necessities. She noticed how people greeted Yancy with respect, though there was a certain wariness in some interactions that she couldn't quite interpret. As Yancy settled accounts with the storekeeper, an elegant woman in a fashionable dress entered the store. She was perhaps 35, with carefully styled blonde hair and a calculated smile that appeared the moment she spotted Yancy. "Mr. Everett," she greeted him, her voice carrying clearly across the store. "What a pleasant surprise. We so rarely see you in town these days." Yancy turned, and Julia detected a slight stiffening in his posture. "Mrs. Crawford," he acknowledged with a polite nod, "just picking up supplies." The woman's gaze shifted to Julia, sharp assessment in her eyes. "And who might this be?" "Miss Julia Hayes, our new housekeeper," Yancy introduced. "Miss Hayes, this is Mrs. Viola Crawford, one of our neighbors." "How do you do, Mrs. Crawford?" Julia said politely. "A housekeeper." "Well, that's certainly practical." Mrs. Crawford's smile didn't reach her eyes. "Though I must say, Mr. Everett, many of us had hoped you might consider a more permanent solution to your household situation. The Thornton girl, for instance, would make a lovely. My household situation is not a matter for public discussion, Mrs. Crawford," Yancy interrupted, his tone remaining civil but with an unmistakable edge. "If you'll excuse us, we have several more stops to make before heading back to the ranch." Mrs. Crawford's smile tightened. "Of course, give my best to those darling boys of yours." She nodded dismissively at Julia. "Miss Hayes." Once outside the store, Samuel tugged at Julia's skirt. "Mrs. Crawford wants Pa to marry her daughter," he whispered, loud enough for Yancy to overhear. "Samuel," Yancy warned, his ears reddening. "That's enough." "But it's true, Pa," the boy insisted. "She brings cakes every time she visits, and she always asks to see the house, and she tells you what a shame it is the boys don't have a mother's influence." Yancy sighed deeply. "Let's get our other errands done, shall we?" He turned to Julia, looking uncomfortable. "I apologize for Mrs. Crawford. She's appointed herself the town matchmaker." "There's no need to apologize," Julia assured him, though she felt oddly unsettled by the encounter. They continued their business in town, stopping at the post office, the blacksmith, and finally the small restaurant attached to the hotel for a hot meal before the journey home. Throughout the afternoon, Julia noticed several more significant looks from townspeople, particularly when Yancy introduced her to the postmaster and again to the banker they encountered outside the restaurant. "I fear I may be the subject of town gossip," she remarked quietly to Yancy as they prepared to depart. "People seem quite interested in my presence." He frowned. "Pay it no mind. Small towns run on gossip. They'll find something else to talk about soon enough." The return journey began in somewhat subdued spirits, but as they left the town behind, the boys' enthusiasm returned. True to his promise, Yancy stopped at a small waterfall about an hour from town, allowing them all to stretch their legs and enjoy the scenery. The waterfall itself was modest in size but charming, tumbling over moss-covered rocks into a clear pool below. Wildflowers dotted the surrounding meadow, and butterflies flitted among them in the afternoon sunshine. "It's lovely," Julia said sincerely as she watched the boys skipping stones into the pool below the falls. "Elizabeth used to bring a sketchbook here," Yancy said, standing beside her. "She had quite a talent for drawing. I have some of her work at home. I should show you sometime." I'd like that, Julia replied. They stood in companionable silence for a few moments, watching the boys play. Miss Hayes, Yancy began, then hesitated. Julia, if I may, he waited for her nod before continuing. I want you to know that your presence at the ranch has been transformative. Not just the work you've done with the house and the boys, but he searched for words. There's a lightness there now that's been missing for a long time. Julia felt warmth spread through her chest at his words. I'm glad, she said simply. I've found great satisfaction in my work with you and the boys. I hope you'll stay with us for a good long while, he said, his eyes meeting hers with an intensity that made her breath catch slightly. I have no plans to leave, Mr. Everett. Yancy, he corrected gently. If we're to work closely together raising the boys, perhaps we could use our given names, at least when it's just us. Yancy, she repeated, liking the feel of his name on her lips. And yes, you may call me Julia. A call from James interrupted the moment he'd found a particularly interesting rock formation he wanted to show them. As they walked toward the boys, Julia was acutely aware of Yancy beside her and of the subtle shift that had occurred between them. The weeks that followed the town visit brought new developments to the Everett Ranch. Summer was in full bloom, bringing longer days filled with activity. The vegetable garden Julia had reclaimed was thriving, providing fresh produce for their meals. The house continued to improve under her care, and she had begun teaching the boys to help with age-appropriate chores, which they tackled with surprising enthusiasm. Julia had settled into her role with increasing confidence. She no longer felt like a newcomer or an outsider, but an integral part of the household. The boys came to her with their questions, concerns, and triumphs throughout the day, and increasingly so did Yancy. The barriers of formality had gradually eroded between them. In private, they used each other's given names, and their evening conversations over coffee had become a cherished ritual for both. They spoke of the day's events, the children's progress, books they'd read, and increasingly their past lives and deeper thoughts. Julia learned about Yancy's childhood in Missouri, his dreams of building something meaningful in the West, and the challenges he'd faced establishing the ranch. In turn, she shared stories of her life in Pennsylvania, her brief but happy marriage to John, and her hopes for the future. What neither of them spoke about directly was the growing connection between them, the lingering glances, the way they found reasons to be in the same room, the warmth that filled Julia's chest when Yancy smiled at her, the light that entered his eyes when she appeared. It was Samuel who brought matters to a head one evening in late July. The boys had been in bed for over an hour, and Julia and Yancy were enjoying their usual coffee in the kitchen. Their conversation had wandered to childhood memories, both of them laughing over stories of youthful misadventures. "Pa likes you," a small voice announced from the kitchen doorway. They both turned to find Samuel standing there in his nightshirt, looking very serious for an 8-year-old. "Samuel," Yancy said, rising from his chair, "you should be asleep." "I was thirsty," the boy explained, "but then I heard you laughing." He focused his gaze on Julia. "Pa hasn't laughed like that since before Mama went to heaven. He likes you a lot." Julia felt her cheeks grow warm. "I like your father too, Samuel. He's a good man and a wonderful father." "No," Samuel insisted with the direct honesty of childhood. "I mean he likes you the way he liked Mama. I heard him tell Mr. Charles that you make him feel alive again." Yancy's face had turned crimson. "Samuel, that's enough. Get your water and back to bed, please." Samuel filled a cup at the pump, then paused at the doorway. "I think you should marry Miss Hayes, Pa, then she'd stay forever and we'd be a real family again." With that pronouncement delivered, he disappeared back toward the stairs. The silence that followed was deafening. Julia stared at her coffee cup, her heart pounding in her ears. Yancy remained standing, seemingly frozen in place. "Julia," he finally said, his voice rough. "I don't know what to say." She looked up at him then. "Is it true," she asked softly, "what Samuel said?" Yancy ran a hand through his hair, a gesture she'd come to recognize as a sign of his discomfort, but when he met her eyes, there was no evasion in his gaze. "Yes," he admitted, "though I hadn't planned on having this conversation quite so abruptly." He sat back down, his movements careful, as though he feared startling her. The truth is, I've developed feelings for you that go well beyond appreciation for your work here, but I had no intention of burdening you with that knowledge. Why would it be a burden? Julia asked, her own feelings surging to the surface, feelings she'd been carefully holding at bay for weeks. Because you came here seeking employment, not courtship, he replied, and because, he hesitated. Because my heart was broken so completely when Elizabeth died that I never thought it could heal enough to love again. It didn't seem fair to offer you something so damaged. Julia reached across the table and placed her hand over his. Yancy, grief doesn't mean your heart is damaged beyond repair. It means you loved deeply enough to feel profound loss. That's not a flaw, it's a testament to your capacity for love. He turned his hand beneath hers, linking their fingers. You've brought light back into this house, Julia, into my life, into the boys' lives. His voice grew husky with emotion. I find myself thinking of you constantly, wanting to share every small triumph and concern with you, looking forward to these evening conversations more than anything else in my day. Julia's heart swelled at his words. I've felt the same, she confessed. I came here looking only for work and a place to belong. I never expected to find you. What are we to do about it? He asked, uncertainty in his eyes despite the hope there. I suppose, Julia said carefully, we could consider what Samuel suggested. Yancy's eyes widened. Julia, are you saying? I'm saying that I care for you, Yancy, deeply. And I've grown to love Samuel and James as though they were my own. She squeezed his hand. I'm not proposing marriage this instant, we both deserve time to be certain. But I am open to the possibility of a future together, if that's what you want. The smile that spread across Yancy's face was like sunshine breaking through clouds. It's what I want more than anything, he said fervently. But you're right, we shouldn't rush. The boys have already lost one mother. I wouldn't want to bring someone into their lives as a mother figure only to have it not work out. We'll take it slowly, Julia agreed. Get to know each other in this new light. Yancy raised her hand to his lips and pressed a gentle kiss to her knuckles. Thank you, he said simply. For what? For finding me that night in the barn, for seeing me at my most broken and not turning away, for bringing healing to this home and to me. Julia felt tears prick at her eyes. You've healed parts of me too, Yancy, parts I didn't even realize were wounded. Later, as Julia walked back to her cabin beneath a canopy of stars, her heart felt lighter than it had in years. The path ahead wasn't entirely clear, but for the first time in a long while, she allowed herself to imagine a future filled with love and family, a future with Yancy and his boys. The courtship of Julia Hayes and Yancy Everett progressed with careful consideration for the children and their own healing hearts. They maintained proper decorum in front of the boys and the ranch hands, though Samuel's knowing smiles whenever he caught them talking together suggested he was quite satisfied with the developments he'd set in motion. August brought haying season, with all hands needed for the harvest. Julia joined in the work, helping to prepare meals for the field hands and even trying her hand at raking hay alongside the men when extra hands were needed. The physical labor was exhausting but satisfying, and she found herself growing stronger with each passing day. Yancy watched her with undisguised admiration. You've taken to ranch life better than most city folk who come out west, he told her one evening as they sat on the porch after the boys were asleep. These moments together had become precious to both of them, a chance to talk freely without small ears listening. I like the directness of it, Julia replied. The work is hard, but there's an honesty to it. You plant, you harvest, you care for animals, they provide food and income. Everything has purpose and connection. That's exactly it, Yancy said, pleased that she understood. Elizabeth used to say something similar, that everything here makes sense in a way city life never did for her. Julia had noticed that Yancy mentioned Elizabeth more freely now, sharing happy memories without the crushing grief that had once accompanied them. It was a healing she was grateful to witness. Tell me more about her, Julia encouraged. I'd like to know the woman who helped build this place with you, who gave you those wonderful boys. Yancy leaned back in his chair, his face softening in the fading light. She was fearless, he said. When we first came here, this was barely more than wilderness. Our first home was a one-room cabin I built with my own hands. No proper floor, just packed earth. Rattlesnakes would sometimes find their way inside. He shook his head at the memory. Most women would have been terrified, but Elizabeth just grabbed a shovel and dispatched them herself. Julia laughed. I'm not sure I would have been so brave. You would, Yancy said with certainty. You have the same strength in you, different but just as real. He reached for her hand, a gesture that had become familiar between them. She would have approved of you, you know. Taking care of her boys, making this house a home again. I hope so, Julia said softly. The thought of Elizabeth's approval meant more to her than she'd expected. I've been thinking, Yancy said after a comfortable silence. The harvest dance is coming up in town next month. Would you consider attending with me? As my sweetheart, I suppose would be the term. Julia felt a flutter of pleasure at the somewhat old-fashioned word. I would be honored, Yancy. It would make things official in the eyes of the community, he warned. There would be talk. There's already talk, Julia reminded him with a smile. Mrs. Crawford made sure of that the moment she saw me. Yancy grimaced. She's been particularly persistent, stopped by last week when you were helping Mrs. Wilson with her new baby, brought another cake and her daughter in tow. And you didn't tell me, Julia raised an eyebrow, more amused than upset. I sent them away politely, he assured her, told them my affections were already engaged elsewhere. Were those your exact words? Julia teased, charmed by his formal phrasing. Near enough, he admitted with a sheepish smile. I'm not particularly skilled at these matters. You're doing just fine, Julia assured him, squeezing his hand. Their courtship continued to blossom as summer gave way to early autumn. The evenings grew cooler, necessitating shawls for porch sitting, but neither was willing to give up their private time together. Occasionally, Yancy would escort Julia on short walks around the property after the boys were asleep, their hands linked as they strolled beneath the stars. On one such evening, about a week before the harvest dance, they stopped by the small creek that ran along the eastern edge of the ranch. The night was clear, with a half-moon providing just enough light to see by, and the burbling of the water created a peaceful backdrop. Julia, Yancy said, turning to face her. His expression was serious, his eyes intent on hers. Before we attend the dance together and make our courtship public, there's something I need to ask you. Julia's heart quickened. Yes, he took both her hands in his. These past months with you have been the happiest I've known since losing Elizabeth. You've brought joy back into our lives in ways I never thought possible. He paused, seeming to gather his courage. I know we agreed to take things slowly, and I don't wish to rush you, but I find myself increasingly certain of my feelings. I love you, Julia Hayes. I love your kindness, your strength, your gentle way with my boys, your determination, your smile, everything about you. Julia felt tears gathering in her eyes. Yancy, please, let me finish, he said gently. I'm not asking for an immediate answer, but I want you to know that when you're ready, if you're ready, I would be the happiest man alive if you would consent to be my wife. To be a mother to Samuel and James, to build a life with me here on this land. Julia didn't hesitate. Yes, she said, her voice clear and certain despite the tears now flowing freely. Yes, Yancy, I would be honored to be your wife, his face lit with joy. Truly, you're certain. I've never been more certain of anything, she assured him. I love you, Yancy Everett, and I love those boys as if they were my own. I want nothing more than to be a family with you. Yancy drew her into his arms, holding her close against his chest. She could feel the rapid beating of his heart, matching the pace of her own. When he lowered his head to kiss her, it was with a tenderness that made her feel cherished beyond measure. They shared several sweet kisses beneath the moonlight before Yancy reluctantly pulled back. We should return to the house, he said, though his eyes suggested he'd rather stay by the creek all night. But first, he reached into his pocket and withdrew a small object. I've been carrying this for 2 weeks, waiting for the right moment. He opened his palm to reveal a delicate gold ring with a small pearl set in the center, surrounded by tiny diamonds. It was my mother's, he explained. I had Charles take it to the jeweler in Denver last month to be cleaned and sized. I hope it fits. Julia extended her trembling left hand and Yancy slipped the ring onto her finger. It was a perfect fit, as though it had been made for her. "It's beautiful," she whispered, admiring how it caught the moonlight. "Not nearly as beautiful as you," Yancy replied, raising her hand to press a kiss just above the ring. They walked back to the house hand in hand, both unable to stop smiling. At the fork in the path where Julia would normally turn toward her cabin, they paused. "When shall we tell the boys?" she asked. "Tomorrow morning," Yancy decided. "They should be the first to know." Julia nodded in agreement. "And after that, we'll announce our engagement at the harvest dance," he said, a mischievous glint in his eye. "I admit I'm rather looking forward to seeing Mrs. Crawford's face." Julia laughed, feeling lighter than air. "As am I," she confessed, "though that's terribly uncharitable of both of us." "We're only human," Yancy grinned, stealing one more kiss before bidding her good night. Julia barely slept that night, her mind too full of happiness to settle. She kept glancing at the ring on her finger, still hardly able to believe this new turn her life had taken. Just months ago, she'd been alone in the world, uncertain of her future. Now she was engaged to a man she loved deeply and would soon be a mother to 2 wonderful boys. The blessings seemed almost too abundant to comprehend. The next morning, Julia arrived at the main house earlier than usual, her heart fluttering with anticipation of telling Samuel and James. Yancy met her at the door, his eyes lighting up at the sight of her. "Good morning," he said, the simple greeting carrying new meaning now. "The boys are still asleep." "That gives us time to decide how to tell them," Julia replied, stepping into the warm kitchen. She'd baked a special treat the evening before, cinnamon rolls that now needed only to be warmed in the oven. As she busied herself with breakfast preparations, Yancy moved about the kitchen alongside her. There was a new ease between them, a comfortable synchronicity as they worked together. Occasionally their hands would brush, or Yancy would place a gentle hand at the small of her back as he passed behind her, each touch a small thrill. The boys tumbled downstairs just as the cinnamon rolls came out of the oven, their faces lighting up at the special treat. "What's the occasion?" Samuel asked, always perceptive. "You only make cinnamon rolls for special days." Yancy exchanged a glance with Julia, then gestured for the boys to sit at the table. "Your father and I have something important to tell you," Julia said, taking a seat beside Yancy across from the children. The boys looked at them expectantly, James with a cinnamon roll already clutched in his small hand. "Miss Hayes has done me the great honor of agreeing to become my wife," Yancy announced, reaching for Julia's hand. "She's going to be a part of our family permanently." Samuel's face split into a wide grin. "I knew it, I told you, Pa." James looked slightly confused. "Does that mean you'll be our new mother?" he asked Julia, his voice small, Julia's heart squeezed with tenderness for this sensitive child. "If you'd like me to be," she said gently. "I could never replace your mother. She'll always be your first mother who loved you very much. But I would be honored to be your second mother, to love you and care for you for the rest of my life." James considered this seriously for a moment, then nodded. "I think Mama would be okay with that," he declared with the simple certainty of childhood. "She wouldn't want us to be sad forever." Yancy's eyes glistened with tears at his younger son's words. "That's right, James. Your Mama would want us to be happy. When will you get married?" Samuel wanted to know, practical as always. "We haven't decided yet," Yancy replied, "but not too long, I hope. Before Christmas?" James asked hopefully. Julia and Yancy exchanged glances. "That seems reasonable," Julia agreed. "We'll need some time to plan, but yes, I think before Christmas would be lovely." The boys peppered them with questions throughout breakfast. Would Julia move into the main house? Would they have a big wedding? Would there be cake? Yancy and Julia answered as best they could, though many details remained to be decided. Word of their engagement spread quickly among the ranch hands, with Charles being the first to offer hearty congratulations. "About time," the grizzled foreman said, pumping Yancy's hand. "Best thing that could happen for you and those boys." The harvest dance became the perfect opportunity to announce their news to the wider community. Julia wore her best dress for the occasion, a deep green wool that complemented her auburn hair. Yancy had splurged on a new shirt and string tie, and the boys were scrubbed clean and dressed in their Sunday best. The town hall had been decorated with autumn leaves, pumpkins, and bundles of dried corn stalks. A small band played lively tunes in one corner, and tables laden with food lined the walls. Nearly everyone from miles around had gathered for the annual celebration. Their entrance together caused heads to turn and whispers to spread, but Yancy kept a protective arm around Julia's waist, his expression daring anyone to voice disapproval. The boys stayed close, clearly enjoying their role in this family drama. Mr. Everett, Mrs. Crawford approached almost immediately, her daughter hovering behind her. "How lovely to see you at a social event. It's been far too long." "Mrs. Crawford," Yancy nodded politely, "you remember Miss Hayes?" "Of course," the woman replied, her smile not quite reaching her eyes. "Still keeping house for the Everetts, Miss Hayes?" "Actually," Yancy said before Julia could respond, "Miss Hayes has agreed to become my wife. We're here to announce our engagement, Mrs." Crawford's carefully composed face slipped for just a moment, revealing genuine shock before she recovered her social mask. "Well, that is surprising news. Congratulations." "Thank you," Julia replied serenely, leaning slightly into Yancy's side. Throughout the evening, they received a mixture of reactions, genuine delight from some, polite congratulations masking surprise from others, and a few barely concealed looks of disapproval from those who thought a proper widow should wait longer before remarrying, or that Yancy should have chosen someone of higher social standing. None of it mattered to Julia or Yancy. They danced together beneath the harvest decorations, her hand in his eyes never leaving her face. When he pulled her closer than was strictly proper during a waltz, Julia felt as though her heart might burst with happiness. "Are you happy?" He murmured in her ear as they swayed to the music. "Completely," she assured him. "And you?" "More than I ever thought possible again," he replied, his voice thick with emotion. As the music ended, he kept hold of her hand and led her to the center of the room. With a nod to the band leader, who obligingly called for attention, Yancy formally announced their engagement to the assembled community. "Many of you have wondered about the changes at the Everett Ranch these past months," he said, his voice carrying clearly through the hall. "I'm pleased to tell you that Miss Julia Hayes has agreed to become my wife. We plan to be married before Christmas." A smattering of applause broke out, growing stronger as friends and well-wishers called out congratulations. The boys, standing nearby with plates of cake, beamed with pride. Later, as they drove home beneath a canopy of stars, the boys asleep in the back of the wagon, Julia leaned her head against Yancy's shoulder. "I never imagined this," she said softly, "when I arrived at your ranch that night and found you in the barn. I was just looking for work, for a place to belong. And I was just a broken man trying to raise his sons alone," Yancy replied, his arm tightening around her. "You brought us back to life, Julia." "We brought each other back to life," she corrected gently. "That's what love does, I think. It heals us." In the weeks that followed, preparations for the wedding occupied much of Julia's time. She moved her belongings from the cabin to the main house, taking over the sewing room that had once been Elizabeth's. With Yancy's blessing, she transformed it into a comfortable sitting room where she could work on her mending or read in the evenings. They decided on a December wedding, just before Christmas, to be held in the small church in Pine Creek. Julia wrote to her few remaining relatives back east, though she didn't expect many to make the long journey. Yancy had a wider circle of friends and business associates in the territory who would attend. Mrs. Wilson from the neighboring ranch helped Julia select fabric for a wedding dress, a creamy ivory satin that would be practical enough to wear for other special occasions after the wedding. They worked together on the pattern, with Julia doing most of the sewing herself in the evenings after the boys were asleep. As the wedding day approached, the entire ranch joined in the preparations. The hands built extra tables for the reception to be held at the ranch after the ceremony. Julia and the boys baked dozens of cookies and pies in advance, storing them carefully for the celebration. The day before the wedding, an unexpected visitor arrived at the ranch. Julia was in the kitchen preparing supper when she heard a carriage approaching. Looking out the window, she saw a smart buggy driven by a well-dressed man she didn't recognize. Yancy went out to meet the visitor, and Julia watched through the window as the two men shook hands, Yancy looking surprised but not displeased. A few minutes later, Yancy brought the stranger inside. "Julia," he said, an odd note in his voice. "This is Harold Thompson, Elizabeth's brother from St. Louis. Harold, my fiancée, Julia Hayes." "Miss Hayes," the man said, bowing slightly. "A pleasure to meet you, though I must admit your existence comes as something of a surprise." Julia wiped her hands on her apron and extended one to the visitor. "Mr. Thompson, welcome to the Everett Ranch. I'm sorry if our news hasn't reached you." "Harold's been in Europe for business this past year," Yancy explained. "My letter must have missed him." "Indeed," Thompson agreed. "I returned to find several communications from Yancy waiting for me. I came as soon as I could." He glanced around the kitchen. "I must say the place looks considerably more ordered than when I visited last. Julia has worked wonders with the house," Yancy said, pride evident in his voice. "And with the boys, speaking of whom, Samuel James," he called up the stairs. "Come down and greet your uncle." The boys thundered down the stairs, their faces lighting up at the sight of their visitor. "Uncle Harold," they cried in unison, rushing to embrace him. Thompson's severe expression softened as he knelt to hug his nephews. "My word, how you've grown," he marveled. "Samuel, you're nearly as tall as I am, and James, you look more like your mother every day." The reunion was joyful, though Julia sensed an underlying tension in Thompson's manner whenever he looked at her. As the evening progressed, with Harold joining them for supper and regaling the boys with tales of his European travels, she found herself wondering about his true purpose in coming. Her questions were answered after the boys went to bed. The three adults sat in the parlor, Thompson studying Julia openly across his cup of coffee. "So," he said finally, "you're to marry my brother-in-law tomorrow?" "Yes," Julia replied simply. "Rather sudden, wouldn't you say?" "I understand you've only been employed here since spring." Yancy's jaw tightened. "Harold, if you have concerns, speak plainly." Thompson set down his cup. "Very well, I worry about my sister's children, about whether this arrangement is in their best interest." "The boys adore Julia," Yancy said firmly. "She's been a blessing to them and to me." "I'm sure she's a very capable housekeeper," Thompson acknowledged, "but marriage is another matter entirely. My sister was a woman of refinement, of education." "She raised those boys with certain expectations, Mr. Thompson," Julia interrupted, her voice calm but resolute. "I understand your concern for your nephews. They're fortunate to have an uncle who cares so deeply for their welfare, but I love Samuel and James as if they were my own children. I would give my life for them without hesitation, and I love your brother-in-law with all my heart." Thompson seemed taken aback by her directness. "Miss Hayes, I meant no personal offense. I'm not offended," she assured him. "But I want you to understand that this is not an arrangement, as you put it. This is a family coming together out of love and mutual respect." "Harold," Yancy said, leaning forward in his chair, "Elizabeth would want the boys to have a mother who loves them. Who better than the woman who found us at our lowest point and helped us rebuild our lives?" Thompson's expression softened slightly. "Found you." Julia arrived the night of Elizabeth's birthday, Yancy explained. "She found me crying in the barn while the boys slept in the house." "At my lowest point," he reached for Julia's hand. "She saw me broken and still chose to stay, to help, to love us all." Understanding dawned in Thompson's eyes. "I see." He was quiet for a moment, then nodded slowly. "Elizabeth would have appreciated that. She always worried about what would happen to you and the boys if anything happened to her." He looked at Julia with new respect. "My sister was the most loving person I've ever known. If Yancy and the boys have found love again, she would be the first to celebrate it." "Thank you," Julia said softly. "Your approval means a great deal, especially to the boys." "Well then," Thompson said, rising to his feet, "it seems I'm just in time for a wedding. I would be honored to give the bride away if she has no one else to do so." Julia felt tears spring to her eyes. "I would be honored, Mr. Thompson." The wedding day dawned bright and clear, with fresh snow blanketing the landscape overnight, creating a pristine white carpet that sparkled in the winter sunshine. The small church in Pine Creek was decorated with evergreen boughs and red berries, filling the air with the scent of pine. Julia prepared in a small room at the back of the church, Mrs. Wilson helping her with the final adjustments to her dress and veil. Through the window, she could see guests arriving, stomping snow from their boots before entering the church. "You look beautiful, my dear," Mrs. Wilson said, arranging the veil one last time. "Yancy won't be able to take his eyes off you." A knock at the door revealed Harold Thompson, looking distinguished in a formal black suit. "The church is full," he informed her, "and I've never seen my brother-in-law so nervous. Are you ready, Miss Hayes?" Julia took a deep breath. "I am. Then let's not keep your groom waiting any longer." As the church doors opened and the small gathering rose to their feet, Julia felt a moment of perfect clarity. This was right. This was where she belonged. Her eyes found Yancy standing at the altar, Samuel and James beside him as his groomsmen. The look of awe and love on his face as he saw her for the first time in her wedding gown brought tears to her eyes. With Harold Thompson's steady arm supporting her, Julia walked down the aisle to meet her future. The ceremony was simple but deeply meaningful. They exchanged vows they had written themselves, promising to cherish one another, to raise the boys together in love and understanding, to build a life of shared joy and purpose. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Yancy's kiss was tender and reverent, a promise of the life they would share. The reception at the ranch was a joyful celebration, with music and dancing continuing well into the evening. The hands had decorated the barn with more evergreens and lanterns, transforming the utilitarian space into a festive hall. Even Mrs. Crawford attended, offering stiffly polite congratulations before departing early. As the last guests left and the boys finally succumbed to exhaustion, Yancy and Julia stood on the porch of their home, his arm wrapped securely around her waist. "Mrs. Everett," he said, testing the sound of her new name. "How does it feel?" "Perfect," Julia replied, leaning into his embrace. "Absolutely perfect." They stood together in the moonlight, the snow-covered landscape stretching out before them, their home warm and waiting behind them. From heartbreak to healing, from loneliness to love, their journey had brought them to this moment of perfect contentment. "Do you know what today is?" Yancy asked softly. Julia nodded. "1 year exactly since I arrived at the ranch and found you in the barn. The day everything changed," he murmured, turning her in his arms to face him. "The day I began to live again." As his lips met hers in a kiss filled with promise, Julia knew with absolute certainty that they had found their way home, not to a place, but to each other. 10 years later, the Everett Ranch had grown into one of the most prosperous in the territory. The main house had been expanded to accommodate their growing family in addition to Samuel and James. Now strapping young men of 18 and 16, Yancy and Julia had been blessed with 3 more children. Elizabeth, named for the boy's mother, was 8, William was 6, and little Catherine had just celebrated her 4th birthday. The land had flourished under Yancy's careful management, with Julia as his full partner in all decisions. They had weathered storms, both literal and figurative drought years, cattle illness, economic downturns, and the ordinary challenges of family life. Through it all, their love had only deepened, strengthened by shared purpose and mutual respect. On the anniversary of their wedding each year, they still made time to stand together on the porch, watching the sunset and reflecting on the journey that had brought them together. This year, after the children were asleep, they walked hand in hand to the barn where Julia had first found Yancy crying that fateful night. "I never told you," Yancy said as they settled on a hay bale, much as he had been sitting when she discovered him, "but the night you arrived, I had been thinking about selling the ranch. Moving back east. I didn't think I could do it anymore, raise the boys, run the ranch, face each day without Elizabeth." "I didn't know," Julia said softly, leaning against his shoulder. "Then you appeared like some angel sent to save us," he continued. "And day by day you helped me remember how to live. How to hope." He turned to face her, taking both her hands in his. Every day for the past 11 years, I've thanked God for sending you to us. And I thank him for leading me here, Julia replied, her eyes shining with love in the lantern light, for the chance to love you and the boys. For our beautiful children, for this life we've built together. Yancy drew her close, his arms as strong and sure as they had been on their wedding day. I love you, Julia Everett, more with each passing day, and I love you, she whispered against his lips, always and forever. As they shared a tender kiss in the quiet of the barn where their story began. Both knew with absolute certainty that the broken hearts they had once carried had been not just mended, but made stronger, more capable of love than either could have imagined on that wind-swept night when a woman seeking work found a man seeking hope. And together, they found the family they were always meant to be.